You're standing in your own kitchen on the third week of July, and the air feels like a wet wool blanket somebody laid across your shoulders. The window unit in the next room has been roaring since May. You can hear it in your sleep now. You can feel it in the bill. The one that crawled past $300 last month and is reaching for $400 this month. And here's the part that should bother you more than it does. The house still isn't comfortable. The kitchen is hot. The upstairs is hotter. You move the money around, you move the air around, and you sweat anyway. Now let me put you somewhere else. A farmhouse outside Charm, Ohio, in Holmes County. Same July, same sun. No compressor running anywhere on the property. No hum. And when you step in through the back door, the air hits you like the inside of a cellar. Cool, still, dry, steady. I checked it with my own thermometer. 55 degrees on the main floor. Outside, it was 91. The man who built that house, an Amish farmer named Levi Hirschberger, watched me stare at that thermometer, and he just smiled. He'd buried the whole secret in his yard for about $300, and he'd done it 26 years ago, and he hasn't touched it since. And stay with me to the end, because there's a USDA bulletin from the 1930s that laid this whole thing out in plain English for any farmer who could read, and then quietly stopped being reprinted right around the time the room air conditioner went on sale. That timing is not an accident. Nobody bans a hole in the ground. They just stop telling you about it. Let me back up and tell you how I got here, because I earned this the expensive way. For years, I did it the modern way. 2 window units, then a third. Then I got a quote for a proper central system, a heat pump, ductwork, the whole package, $11,000. And that was the friendly number. I didn't do it. Instead, I limped along on the window units. And between the units and the running cost, I figure I spent the better part of $4,000 over a few summers to be uncomfortable in my own home. $4,000 to lose. That's the part that stings. So I drove to Ohio. I'd heard about these houses, and Levi walked me out into his side yard, pointed at the grass and said, "It's all down there. You're standing on it. Here's what's down there. A pipe. That's the whole machine. A long run of pipe, buried deep, that brings outside air into the house the slow way, through the ground. And the reason it works comes down to something the earth does, whether you ask it to or not. Dig down a few feet, and the wild temperature swings up here at the surface start to flatten out. Get down to 4 feet, deeper if your ground lets you, and the soil quits paying attention to the weather almost entirely. Down where Levi's pipe runs, the ground holds right around 55 degrees, and it barely moves all year. Not in July, not in January. The dirt under your feet is the most stable temperature on your whole property, and it is free, and it is already there, and you are doing absolutely nothing with it. So you run a pipe through it. Hot summer air goes in one end. It spends 30, 40, 100 feet crawling through ground that's sitting at 55 degrees, and by the time it reaches your house, it has given up its heat to the soil. It comes out cool. They've called it a lot of things over the years. An earth tube, a cooling tube. The old Persians had a version of it 2,000 years ago. The principle is just conduction. Heat moves from the warm thing to the cool thing every single time, and the ground always wins, because the ground is enormous. But here's the piece most people miss, and it's the piece that makes Levi's house feel like a cellar instead of a swamp. When that warm, humid summer air hits the cool wall of the buried pipe, the moisture in it condenses right out. Same as a cold glass of tea sweating on a porch table. The water beads up on the inside of the pipe, and it drains away. So the air doesn't just arrive cooler, it arrives drier. And dry, 55-degree air is the difference between a basement that feels fresh and a basement that feels like a cave. That is why the window unit never satisfied you. It chilled the air, sure, but it left it damp. The ground does both jobs at once, and it never sends you a bill. Now, how does the air move through that pipe without a fan? That's the second old trick, and it's older than the first. It's called the stack effect, or the chimney effect, and you felt it your whole life without naming it. Warm air rises, always. So you put a vent up high in the house, a cupola, an attic vent, an open upstairs window on the shaded side, and as that warm air escapes upward, it pulls new air in behind it. And the air it pulls comes from the lowest, coolest opening you've given it, which is the mouth of your buried tube. The whole house becomes a slow chimney. The heat leaving the top does the work of pulling the cool up from the ground. No motor, no electricity. The physics runs itself. Levi didn't explain it to me in those words. He said, the hot air wants out the top, so I let it out the top and it brings the cool up behind it. Same thing, he just skipped the textbook. Now, about that bulletin, the USDA put out farmers' bulletins for decades, practical, plain-spoken pamphlets on everything from curing hams to keeping a cellar cold. There was a run of them in the 1930s and into the 1940s on cooling farm buildings and storing food without ice, and they describe air drawn through cool earth in clear, almost casual language, the way you describe sweeping a floor. Penn State and the other land-grant extensions printed their own versions. This wasn't secret knowledge in 1936. It was Tuesday, and then something changed. And it didn't change because anybody proved the ground tube wrong. It changed because the room air conditioner came down in price after the war, and a brand new industry needed every American to believe that comfort came in a box you bought and plugged in and replaced. There is a lot of money in a machine that runs every summer and dies in 12 years. There is no money at all in a buried pipe that lasts longer than the man who dug it. Nobody takes out a magazine ad for a hole in the ground. There's no quarterly earnings report for the stack effect. So the bulletins stopped being reprinted somewhere around the early 60s. The extension pamphlets dropped the chapter, and within a generation, the cooling tube simply fell out of the books. And here is where the word illegal earns its place, because people misunderstand it. Nobody passed a law against burying a pipe. What happened is quieter and harder to fight. The building codes got rewritten around the assumption that cooling means a sealed, mechanical refrigerant system. Mechanical cooling has a code section. Earth cooling does not. So when a system isn't in the book, an inspector has nothing to approve, and a thing an inspector can't approve becomes a thing you can't permit, and a thing you can't permit may as well not exist. It wasn't outlawed, it was erased, and that's worse, in a way, because you can't repeal an erasure. Now, if you already own your home, and you're sitting there thinking, this is only for folks building fresh from a bare lot, I want you to lean in, because this next part is built for you, specifically. You do not tear into your house. You do not start over. Here's what Levi had me write down. You buy a run of smooth-walled pipe. 4-inch will cool one room, 6-inch will move enough air to matter for a whole floor. Plan on somewhere between 60 and 100 feet of it. Smooth-walled plastic drain pipe from a plumbing or farm supply runs you the bulk of the $300. Figure roughly $150 to $200 for the pipe, and the rest for fittings, a screened intake cap to keep the critters out, and a couple bags of gravel. You dig a trench across your yard, 4 feet down at the least, and you lay the pipe in it on a gentle, steady downhill slope. One end surfaces out in the yard, in the shade if you've got it, capped with a screen a couple feet off the ground. The other end comes into the house low, through a crawl space vent, a basement wall, a foundation block you knock through. Then you open a high vent up top to let the heat climb out and pull the cool up behind it. That's the entire job. A strong weekend with a rented trencher, or a couple of slower ones with a shovel and a stubborn streak. And notice what you did not do. You did not get a contractor. You did not get a permit, because in most places, a pipe in your own yard is just landscaping. You did not touch your existing furnace, your wiring, or your walls. You retrofitted a 55-degree air supply onto a house you already own for less than the cost of one summer of window units. But the slope I mentioned is not a small detail. And this is the part the plain folks don't hand to outsiders over one visit. I had to go back twice before Levi told me the rest. He took me down to where the pipe entered the cellar, and at the lowest point of the run, there was a little capped cleanout with a bed of gravel, and sitting in it, a bundle of charred oak. Hardwood, burned down to charcoal, wrapped loose in cloth. Two things were happening there. First, the slope meant every drop of condensation from that summer humidity ran downhill to that one low spot and drained away instead of pooling in the pipe. Second, the charred oak sat in the airstream and drank up the moisture and any sour smell, the way charcoal always does, keeping the air sweet on its way into the house. That is the whole difference between a tube that smells like a clean root cellar after 26 years and a tube that goes musty in 2 summers. He replaces the charcoal maybe every few years. Costs him nothing. He burns his own. And that, right there, is why most people who try this get mediocre results. So before I let you go, walk back through it with me, because the failures all come down to 2 or 3 things. They run the pipe flat, or worse, they run it sloping the wrong way, so the condensation has nowhere to go, and the whole tube turns into a damp, moldy sleeve. And then they blame the method. The method is fine. They forgot the water has to drain. Second, they bury it too shallow. 2 feet, because 2 feet is easy. And at 2 feet, the ground still feels the summer, so the air comes out lukewarm, and they decide it doesn't work. It works. They just didn't get down to where the temperature stops moving. And third, they skip the high vent, expect the air to push itself, and then wonder why nothing flows. The ground cools the air, the chimney moves it. You need both halves, or you've got half a system and a trench full of regret. Get those 3 right, the depth, the drainage, the draw, and you have a thing that holds your house near 55 degrees on the hottest day of the year and asks nothing of you in return. No filter, no refrigerant, no part number. The pipe Levi laid will outlast his roof. So here's what I want from you. In the comments, don't just tell me you liked it. Tell me 3 things. What state you're in, how deep your frost line runs. Your county extension knows it if you don't. And the year your house was built. Because the older the house, the easier the retrofit. And I read every one of these. And the next thing I'm putting together gets into exactly how to route one of these into an old foundation. And if you're the kind of person who started to feel that the comfortable, sealed, monthly billed life we were all sold came at a price our grandparents never agreed to pay, subscribe and stand with the rest of us. There are more people doing this than you'd think. Folks in their 50s and 60s and 70s mostly, quietly digging back up what their grandparents buried in plain sight. This is one piece of it. There are dozens more. Next time, I want to show you the stone-cold room the old Pennsylvania families built into a north bank, a design going back to the 1870s that holds steady at 38 degrees, cold enough to keep milk and meat through the summer, with no ice, no power, and no machine. Same idea as today, same ground, doing the same patient work. They just pointed it at a different problem. The ground was always going to hold 55 degrees. The only question was whether anybody would tell you.